All right, so get this. Today we're going deep on group dynamics. We got some pretty fascinating excerpts from a textbook on the subject, and let me tell you, this stuff's really insightful.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It's like getting a peek behind the curtain to see what really makes groups tick, you know?
Totally, like what makes some groups work so well while others just fall apart.
Exactly. And it's not just some academic thing, it's relevant to like every part of our lives work, family, friendships, even just casual groups. It's all about dynamics.
So true. So, uh, where do we even start with something this complex?
Well, like a lot of fields, there's usually that one person who kind of kicks things off. In this case, it's Kurt Lewin. He's often called the father of group dynamics.
Oh yeah, I've heard that name before.
He was a social psychologist back in the early 1900s, and he was really pushing this idea of studying groups as these like dynamic, almost living things.
Dynamic living things. Wow, I like that.
Yeah, it really captures that sense of constant change and interaction within a group.
Totally.
So how did Lewin's work lead to how we understand group dynamics today?
Well, he helped to define the whole concept. Group dynamics are the forces at play within a group. It's the interactions between members that actually change individual behavior.
So it's not just who's in the group, but how they interact with each other.
Exactly. And this isn't just theoretical. It's happening all around us all the time.
Oh, I know that for sure.
Think about it. Your family, your coworkers, even just people you meet online.
You act differently depending on who you're with. Yeah, for sure.
See, it's group dynamics in action.
Okay, I'm getting it, but why should we even care about this stuff?
Well, two other researchers, Cartwright and Zander, they had these three assumptions about groups that I think are super important.
Okay, hit me with them.
First, they said groups are inevitable. We're constantly forming and joining them, no matter how individualistic we might think we are.
That's so true.
Right. It's like this basic human need to connect and belong.
Okay, so groups are inevitable. What's the second assumption? Groups are powerful. Think about it. They can influence your decisions, your beliefs, even your sense of self.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty intense.
It is.
All right, so inevitable and powerful. I'm kind of scared to hear the third one.
Well, it's that groups can have both positive and negative consequences.
Makes sense.
They can be a source of incredible creativity and collaboration, but they can also lead to conflict, prejudice, even violence.
Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So understanding group dynamics is about harnessing that power for good and minimizing the potential downsides.
I'm starting to see why this stuff is so important. But how do we even begin to unpack something this complex?
Well, let's start with communication.
Seems basic, but yeah, I guess it's crucial.
The way a group communicates, like the interaction patterns, the verbal and nonverbal cues, the leadership styles, it all affects how effective they can be.
Totally. Even something as simple as whether everyone feels comfortable speaking up, you know?
Yeah, right. And then there's interpersonal attraction and cohesion. Why do we click with some people and not others? Why do we choose certain groups?
Well, I know I tend to go towards groups where I feel like I fit in.
Sure, shared interests, values, all that. But think about proximity, too. The more you're around certain people, the more likely you are to form bonds.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
And acceptance, feeling valued by the group, that's huge.
So feeling like you belong is a big factor,
Definitely. And all of that contributes to cohesion, that feeling of togetherness.
which then affects how well the group performs, I bet. Like a cohesive team gets more done.
You got it. And it's not just about everyone liking each other, though. Social integration is important, too. That's how norms, roles, and status hierarchies create order and predictability within the group.
Okay, hold on. Norms, roles, status. What does all that mean?
Well, think of norms like the unwritten rules. What's acceptable behavior in this group? Roles are the parts we play, leader, follower, whatever. And status hierarchies, well, they determine who has the influence.
So these are things we might not even be aware of, but they're shaping how the group works.
Exactly. And remember those researchers we talked about, Deutsch and Girard?
Yeah, vaguely.
They identified these two types of social influence, normative and informational.
Okay, refresh my memory.
Normative is basically our desire to fit in.
Mhm.
Like when you go along with the group, even if you don't totally agree, just because you don't want to rock the boat.
Oh, I've totally done that. More times than I can count.
We all have. And then there's informational influence, which is more about accepting information as true because it comes from someone you see as knowledgeable,
Mhm.
like changing your mind based on what someone else said because you trust their expertise.
So it's not just about fitting in. It's about trusting the group as a source of information, too.
Exactly. And of course, all of this ties into culture.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Those shared values and beliefs shape how we interact and how those dynamics play out.
And in today's world, where we're working with people from all different cultures,
Yeah.
that adds another layer of complexity, right?
For sure. And speaking of layers of complexity, there's also the whole concept of how groups evolve over time, those stages of group development.
Okay, now we're getting into some seriously juicy stuff, like the life cycle of a group, right?
Yeah.
But you know what? I think we need to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. We'll pick up right where we left off. So remember how we were saying that groups aren't static?
Yeah, they're constantly changing and evolving.
Right. And they actually go through these kind of predictable phases as they evolve, like a life cycle.
Oh, I like that, a life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And about all that stuff we talked about before, communication, power dynamics, norms,
Mm-hmm.
it all ties into these phases.
Absolutely. And one of the best known models for understanding these stages is Tuckman's stages of group development. He laid out these 4 key phases: forming, storming, norming, and performing.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. Just the names of those phases are so descriptive.
Right. They really paint a picture. So forming, that's that initial stage, when the group first comes together.
Everyone's feeling each other out.
Exactly. Think about when you join a new group, a team at work, a book club, anything. In the forming stage, everyone's a little hesitant, trying to make a good impression, figuring out the group's purpose and all that.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like everyone's on their best behavior. Okay, so what happens next?
Then comes storming.
Storming. Huh.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit more dramatic.
Yeah, this is where things can get a little heated. People start asserting themselves more, maybe challenging ideas, jostling for roles.
Oh, so conflict starts to bubble up.
Exactly. But, think of it like healthy friction.
Healthy friction.
Yeah, like those disagreements and tensions, they can actually be good for the group in the long run.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing if there's some conflict.
Not at all. It's how those initial differences get worked through, how boundaries get established, how expectations get clarified, and it all leads to the next phase, norming.
Norming. So things start to calm down a bit.
Exactly. In this stage, you start to see clear norms emerging. Those unwritten rules of behavior we talked about before, roles become more defined, and there's a greater sense of unity and cohesion.
The group is starting to gel.
Yeah, they're finding their rhythm, which sets them up for the performing stage.
Yeah, performing. This is where the magic happens, right? Everyone's working together seamlessly, achieving goals, all that.
That's the idea. But it's important to remember that not all groups reach this stage. And some might cycle back and forth between stages depending on what's going on.
It's not a linear path.
Right. And that's what I love about Tuckman's model. It highlights how dynamic this whole process is.
Totally. I can definitely see how this model plays out in real life. Thinking back to some teams I've been on, you go through that awkward forming phase, then some conflict, and then finally you find your groove and start getting things done.
It's so interesting to see it happen, isn't it?
It really is. And it's not just work teams. It's families, social groups, all sorts of groups.
You got it. So Tuckman gives us this great framework for understanding group development. But there are other models out there too.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
Yeah, one is from Garland, Jones, and Collody. They came up with a model that has 5 stages: pre-affiliation, power and control, intimacy, differentiation, and separation.
5 stages. Wow. Okay, walk me through those.
Sure. Pre-affiliation is that very first stage where people are just starting to think about joining a group. They're kind of checking it out, seeing if it's a good fit for them.
Like dipping your toes in the water before you jump in.
Exactly. And then comes power and control. This is where things start to get interesting. Individuals are figuring out where they stand in the group, who has influence, how decisions get made, all that.
So those power dynamics start to come into play.
Yeah. It's a little similar to Tuckman's storming stage, but with a bigger emphasis on power. And then we move into intimacy.
Intimacy. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Well, as the name suggests, this is where those closer relationships start forming. Trust builds. People start sharing more personal things. There's a deeper sense of belonging.
So it's moving beyond those more superficial interactions to something more genuine.
Exactly. And then we have differentiation.
Differentiation. What's that all about?
This is where the group starts to appreciate the unique contributions of each member. Individual differences are celebrated, and there's less emphasis on everyone conforming to one way of thinking or doing things.
Oh, I like that. Embracing diversity.
Right. And finally, we have separation.
Separation. Does that mean the group is breaking up?
Not necessarily. It can refer to the natural end of a group, like a project ending or team disbanding, but it can also be about individuals finding their own identity within the group, becoming more independent while still remaining connected to the group as a whole.
It's like a graduation, not a breakup.
That's a great way to put it. And, a key takeaway from both of these models, Tuckman's and Garland, Jones, and Collity's, is that groups are always in flux. They're constantly shifting and changing, responding to the interactions between members and the challenges they face.
It's amazing how dynamic it all is. I'm starting to see the groups I'm in, my book club, my family, in a whole new light.
That's exactly the point. By understanding these concepts and models, you become a more mindful observer of group dynamics.
So we've talked about why group dynamics matter, explored those key elements like communication and social integration, and learned about these two really insightful models for understanding how groups evolve.
Yeah.
What's next? Where do we go from here?
All right, so we've spent the last two parts of our deep dive really getting into the nitty-gritty of group dynamics. Now, how do we actually use all this knowledge in the real world?
Yeah, good question. It's one thing to understand the theory, but how do we apply it to, like, make our groups function better?
Exactly. It's like we've been given this amazing toolkit, but now we need to learn how to use all the tools. I like that, a toolkit. And I think the first step is becoming more aware, like really start paying attention to the groups you're in.
To become a group dynamics detective.
Exactly. Look for those subtle cues, those power dynamics, the unspoken norms, those times when communication breaks down.
It's like you suddenly have X-ray vision for group behavior.
Right. And once you understand the dynamics, you can actually start to influence them.
Okay, so let's say I'm on a team at work, and we're stuck in that storming phase. Lots of conflict, people aren't listening to each other, we're not getting anything done. What can I do using this group dynamics knowledge to help us move forward?
Well, first, remember conflict isn't always a bad thing. It can actually be a sign that people care.
Yeah, they're invested.
Right. The key is making sure that conflict is constructive, not destructive.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
But how do you actually do that? How do you encourage that healthy kind of conflict?
Active listening is huge, making sure everyone feels heard and understood, even if you don't agree with them.
So creating a space where people feel safe to share their opinions.
Exactly. Set some ground rules for respectful communication, but encourage open and honest dialogue. And it can also be helpful to remind everyone of the shared goals.
Oh yeah, like what are we actually trying to achieve here?
Right. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, we lose sight of the bigger picture.
So this all applies to any kind of group, not just work teams, right?
Absolutely. Families, community groups, social clubs, any group, really. Understanding those dynamics can help you navigate challenges and build stronger relationships.
Wow, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's amazing how much there is to learn about groups.
So to wrap things up, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Okay, here's a challenge for everyone. Think of a group you're part of that you wish was a little more, I don't know, effective or enjoyable.
Okay, got it.
Now, put on your group dynamics glasses and really observe what's going on. What are the unspoken norms? Who seems to have the most influence? Are there any communication breakdowns? And then think, what's one small thing you can do to try to shift those dynamics in a positive direction?
I love that challenge. It's a great reminder that we can all play a role in shaping our groups.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing process. The more you pay attention, the more you learn, and the better you get at navigating this whole world of group dynamics.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been truly enlightening.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep observing, keep learning.
Thanks for
and
watching.
Keep exploring the
If you
fascinating
found this
world
video
of
helpful,
groups.
don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology.